Hi, everyone. It's Julie Henricus. I'm the Executive Director of Sisters in Crime, and we do weekly quick conversations with folks about a topic and sort of just have a micro discussion about that topic. So today, I'm thrilled that we're going to be talking to Karen Odden about a topic that is not a micro topic. It's a huge topic, but I love the 5 points that she brought up about writing historical fiction. Karen is well poised to talk about writing historical fiction because she has a PhD in Victorian history, and she also has written other books in that era and has a new series coming out in June. So Karen, thank you for your patience. She and I have been trying to record this in many formats all day. But thanks for being here and thanks for your patience.
Thank you. Thank you. I
And
have a feeling I think this is a me problem. I write books set in 1870s London, and my kids are like, Mom, you belong there. You don't know how to do anything on your phone. You're terrible on your computer. Like we're always shutting down your apps. Like, just so I think this is a me problem. And I'm sorry that we're jumping over to Zoom, but at least we're gonna get this. We'll get to have our conversation, which is the
we
important
will
part.
definitely get to have our conversation, and I will upload this on YouTube and we will share it on all the socials so that people can see the conversation.
Okay.
But I want you to take a minute now. So, in a writer's life, there are joyful moments. One of them is holding your new book baby in your hand. And Karen had that happen today, and here she is.
Yay.
Yay!
So yes, this is my new book. It's coming out on June 2nd. It's available for pre-order now. I'm just beyond happy about this book. I mean, I haven't had a new book in over 3 years. So this is, it's a big deal. And they did a beautiful job. They put like the London end papers so that you can actually follow around where my people are walking. And I mean, it's a story about a young woman who's a thief, a jewel thief. And so, here she is on the spine, her hand is stealing the A. I don't know. I think they were creative, and I don't know. I'm really proud of this book. I think it's going to be awesome. So, yeah.
Well, I can't wait to read it because it's your pitch when you told me about it a while ago when it was first happening. What's
Mhm.
the pitch on this?
So in 1879 London, it's a young woman named Kit Jimison who is one of the thieves who is operating in an all-women thieving gang out of Elephant and Castle in London. It's a sort of a seedy section south of the Thames, and it is based on true fact. There were women who were working in a thieving gang then, and so it's,
I
you know,
love that. I
yeah.
love that. But writing historical fiction is not for the faint of heart. In that, writing in general is a thing. It's a lot of work. But when you're writing historical, whatever genre you're writing in, people who read historical want facts. They're gonna check you. I mean,
Mhm.
oh no,
Yes.
no, they couldn't have gone there, or that
Mhm.
wasn't invented till 2 years later, or
Mhm.
whatever. So
Yes.
there's stuff that you have to
Yes.
do as
Yep.
a historical fiction writer. And so when you and I were talking about today, we said let's talk about 5 tips just for people to think about. You sent me
Mhm.
this wonderful sheet. I'm going to read the tip, and then you're going to sort of fill in what
Okay.
you meant by this. Um,
Okay.
but the first one, understand the tension between historical truth and verisimilitude, which that word
I
is,
know verisimilitude. I had to like teach myself how to say that, like, have it roll off the tongue. So I think this is an important tension, and it's for people for writing historical fiction, historical mystery, anything. So the way I define these two terms is that historical fiction is true fact. Verisimilitude has more to do with what a reader expects or believes to be true based on what they read in their past, television shows, movies, and that kind of thing. So, and I have a couple examples I want to share. So, the first one of my favorites, I'm going to throw out my friend Susan Elia McNeil writes this whole series about Maggie Hope set in World War II. And for it, because Susan's a responsible researcher, she went to the war rooms in London and read the copies of Churchill's letters. In his letters, he uses the abbreviation OMG. This is 1940s. Okay. So now that is historical fact. But she can't put that in a book because, I mean, just imagine the comments. What's he going to say next? LMAO? I mean, it just it upholds historical fact. It destroys verisimilitude. It destroys that feeling of belief. And we all want to carry the reader along on this beautiful river of belief. We do not want them pushing the disbelief button. Okay.
Right.
So
Right.
so she just left it out of her book altogether. Now I inadvertently hit the disbelief button. So in my Inspector Corbin series, the first one is Down a Dark River. I have Inspector Corbin drinking coffee. Now, I got comments from readers, very nice comments, emails and things like that, saying, your books are so well researched. I always learn a whole lot about the justice system and the rivers and blah, blah, blah. But you got the detail. He's not going to drink coffee. The Victorians drank tea. Now, that is kind of the stereotype, right? The Victorian tea drinker with the
Right.
pinky up and the whole thing. But 7 million tons of coffee was making its way into the London Custom House every year in the 1870s. Some of the most exquisite silver sets that you will ever see, coffee sets that are in museums, were made in the 1870s by some of the top London silversmiths. So yes, people were drinking coffee. But what I should have done is recognized that that's going to hit that disbelief button. It's going to wreck the verisimilitude a bit. And I should have tucked in the line. Corvin knew that coffee was more expensive than tea, but it was his one, sort of iconoclastic vice that he allowed
Yeah.
himself.
Yeah.
You need to frame it. So if you're going to, do this to the verisimilitude, if you're going to actually, put it in there, you need to kind of frame it a little bit and acknowledge these are your expectations. This is what I'm doing. Now, had I known it was going to get that kind of response, I might have left it out altogether, except I
Right.
kind of like that he drinks coffee because he doesn't like weak things in the morning. He doesn't like weak things generally, so he doesn't drink tea. But the other thing that, to think about is that the battle you want to fight? Like coffee? No. I mean, in the OMG thing, Susan's like, yeah, I don't need to do that.
Right.
But there are some battles that are worth fighting, some things that I'm willing to push up against reader expectation. And probably the most important one for my books, and certainly for this last one with the female heroine, is people will often say Victorian women weren't allowed to go running around the streets like that. And I say that is true for a certain class of Victorian women, upper
Right.
middle class and upper class women whose virtue and their sort of adherence to the rules governing their class, that was directly tied to their value in the marriage market. They were watched. They had brothers, they had fathers, they had governesses, mothers. I mean, everybody's watching them, right? You're a middle class, lower middle class woman. You're an orphan. You're a thief. You're one of the women who's working in a shop, who's earning wages at the mill, who's, singing at a music hall. Nobody's watching you. There's no reason. I mean, why does
Right.
anybody care? Except for there was the Society for the Suppression of Vice that was running around Victorian London, but they were largely concerned with things like printed pornography and things like that. So there were people watching, morals and keeping an eye, keeping tabs on things like that. But the women had a lot more freedom than most people give them credit for, and that's partly because a lot of the television shows, we think about something like Bridgerton, which is, of course, before the Victorian age, but people think of that and they're like, you know, the society eyes are everywhere. But that is only for a very, very tiny percentage of the population. So one of the ways to give my heroine some latitude is make her a thief, make her parentless, make her, working out of Elephant and Castle as opposed to out of Mayfair.
Right. I love that. I
Yeah.
love that.
Mhm.
Um, all right. The second thing, read books and periodicals that are written in the time period and underline mundane objects and vocabulary. Talk about that.
Okay. So, um, one of the things that I did when I was writing Down a Dark River was every morning before I started writing, and I write in first person, so Inspector Corvin's voice has to sort of be in my head. I'm not Irish. I'm not a former bare knuckles boxer. I am not living in 1870s Whitechapel. So how do I get that voice? And I'm not a policeman. And so what I did was I read the police procedure manual that Sir Howard Vincent wrote in 1878, and I read it out loud. I read just a page, I just read the page out loud. But I got all of those little words and the phrases and it just even little things that they, they that when you are walking the pavement, that's
Hmm.
you don't say sidewalk, you say walking the pavement. Like all those little things that get into your ear and then kind of feather their way onto the page almost without you thinking about it. And I think that's really that's important, especially when you're shooting for a voice that is, different from your own. And then the other thing I do is I read, like here's one of mine, Wilkie Collins, The Woman in White. This was written in the late 1860s, I think. And so I have to put on my reading glasses for this. Once you put your reading glasses on, you can actually read the first page, and I underline things like drawing to a close, cornfields, autumn breezes, my chambers in city, drawing master, great houses, the heath, umbrella, gaiters, white hat, athletic exercises, and bathing, which is their word for swimming. So just even in the first two pages, you can kind of underline words that feel just a little bit um, very sort of that time that we
Hmm.
might not choose to use. And so you can kind of filter those in, and it gives that verisimilitude again.
Right. And reading books written in that time is such a wonderful source of,
Yeah,
glimpses
right.
that are kind of wonderful.
Yeah,
Um,
my go-tos there are Dickens, Trollope, Mary Elizabeth, Braddon, Mrs. Henry Wood, Wilkie Collins. I mean, whatever version of Victorian you happen to like, but Charlotte Bronte and all those people. So yeah.
it's a long period, so there's that.
Mhm.
So lean into the music, literature, fashion, and visual arts of the time and the attitudes towards them.
Yeah. So when I am writing, I am not like a visual creative person. Like when I was when I was an early mom, and my daughter would always want to go to these paint your own pottery places, and she'd be happily painting the eagle's wings all different color, whatever. And I look at a white plate and I'm like, I think polka dots. I can do polka dots. I mean, I really, my creativity doesn't go there at all, but having the visual stuff up on my wall makes a difference. So, actually, I'll see if I can do this gracefully. I'm going to turn you around so you can see my map that's on my wall with all my little tags on it for where things happen.
Oh, yes.
So that's an 1870 map of London. And I have the little tags where things are happening. And I also have a bulletin board over there that has, like, for example, when I was writing A Trace of Deceit, it had a picture of the Pantechnicon fire that happened in Mayfair and ran for 3 days. It has pictures of, paintings, different paintings that the Victorians were looking at and knew, poems that they knew, and that kind of thing. And so, just the visuals, I think help me stay in that world. And then it's important also to know when we talk about their attitude toward them, and this is something that came up in our reading like a writer book club when we were reading the Elizabeth, who was it? It was the
Elizabeth
crocodile.
Peters.
Elizabeth Peters book, right.
Yeah.
And that's set in, 1890s Victorian, because Victorian did run all the way to 1901 when she died. And in it, it's so brilliant because her heroine quotes a Poe poem without acknowledging it. And this was a very Victorian thing. Like Victorians of a certain education memorized poetry. They read it to aloud to each other by firelight and candlelight. They memorized it and they would put it into their dialogue without attribution. They wouldn't say, "Oh, that was a poem by Poe." They just work the line in. And people of a certain education will pick up on it and think, oh,
Yeah.
I know that poem. So that is an attitude toward literature that you can kind of capture and tuck in here and there for certain characters, for whom it's appropriate. Corvin doesn't read poetry, hates poetry, thinks it's stupid. Gordon Styles, his sidekick, was educated. He loves poetry. He tucks it into his language once in a while. So that's what I mean by keeping in mind the attitudes toward it.
Yeah.
And having it, having pictures up on the wall just helps.
Yes, the entire wealth of the
Mhm,
time period, not just
mhm.
certain things.
Yeah.
Um, Be aware of laws governing behavior as well as the social mores.
So I think this is important, particularly for people whose behavior is governed in particular ways by law. And just as an example of this, in the 1800s, sort of the received legal doctrine was one of coverture. It had been around for, hundreds of years. This idea from Blackstone on forward, but this idea that a woman, when she married, was covered by her husband. So if a woman married, everything she owned and everything she was, even her voice in a court of law, belonged to her husband. So significantly, though, in 1870, the very first Married Women's Property Act was passed. And for the very first time, a woman who worked and had a wage legally did not have to turn it over to her husband. So there is a new possibility for behavior there that is important to know. And it might not, it's not relevant for upper class women. Upper class women didn't get those rights until 30 or 40 years later. And even so, they had to have a special trust written by a man and signed by their father saying that they could have their money. So, but to know those kinds of things, I think is important because you can have a spirited heroine, but you can't have her doing things that aren't legal at the time and just call it spunky. That's not,
Yeah.
that doesn't work. And I think sometimes that, having those boundaries on behavior are sort of like the bumpers on a bowling alley. They're good for us. They force us, I mean, because a woman who can't speak in court or own her own money, I mean, it creates all kinds of,
Mhm.
potential plot conflict. And as we all know, conflict is the author's best friend, right? So I think knowing what those limitations are can sometimes be really productive.
Yeah. And and eye-opening. I mean, I love reading historicals because I learn,
Mhm.
and you can know something's true, but then to understand what it means by reading fiction or, a newspaper at the time or something is a completely different experience. And that's
Yeah,
what
to see its
fabulous.
real effects on real people.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Whew. Um, and the last tip that you gave was, I love this. Keep a running list of the images you find and the books and resources you consult along the way as you write. Now, you have a PhD, so this became second nature to you, I'm sure, as you were, writing and getting things done and getting ready to get that going. But that's an amazingly useful tool.
Well, and you'd think I would know. Like, I mean, obviously for my PhD, for my dissertation, I had this Mongo bibliography. And then I wrote my first book, A Lady in the Smoke. And of course, I was consulting all kinds of things and, pretty much plundering my dissertation for all the stuff on railways. But when it came time to writing the author's note, or sometimes it's an acknowledgement or, whatever it is, I had to go digging furiously. My office just looked like, mayhem because I couldn't find all the pieces. And so you'd think I'd know better, but I actually didn't until like I
Uh,
kind of caught on by my second book. But yeah, I keep a list because at the end you can say, these are the resources I've consulted because sometimes people will say, well, I want to know more about Victorian dress, or
right.
Victorian costume, or I want to know more about, the 40 Elephants thieving gang, or I want to know more about railways, whatever it is. And I don't do a lot. I mean, I probably give like 15 or 20 books, that I've consulted just so that people can, say, oh, well, I'd like to know more about English country houses. Well, oh, there's a book called The English Country House. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
But keep
And
it, yeah,
also,
keep it as you go because reconstructing it as your editor is also saying, by the way, is your website updated? And, by the way, can we start lining you up for book talks? And by the way, can you do this and can you do that? And can you do a blog post here and there? And you don't want to, you don't want to be messing with that.
but also that can be a feeder for all those things too. I mean, it's like, okay, let me talk about this fabulous book. And
Mhm.
for folks who start to get interested and want to learn more, that's such a gift to them too, because it's like, if you want to know more, here's some more
Mhm.
things
Mhm.
that
Yeah.
are going to get you deeper into this conversation.
Yeah.
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 So you you love writing in this era and you do it well, but is it fun for you to be moving around as to who your point of view characters are and what their experiences are?
You know, it has been fun. I have one character who has sort of, kind of made their way into most of my books. And so I mean, I think of it as a world. And I'm telling, I tell the inspector piece. I've got Lady Elizabeth. I've got, a music hall, someone who works in music hall. I have Annabelle Rowe, who's a painter at the Slade School. And interestingly, here's a fun tidbit for you for the next Kit book, which I just turned the manuscript in a couple days ago. It's tentatively called A Thieving Season, and it is about a series of art heists. So I'm kind of going back to A Trace of Deceit and the art world and the Slade School and forgery and, I mean, all those kinds of fun things that I learned about back in the 1990s when I was working at Christie's. So, I mean, obviously I wasn't, I think it's wonderful to see like how as you write, you had this governing body of things you want to talk about. And so, the next book, when I'm talking about paintings, I want to talk about people's relationship to their past. How paintings are sometimes they're, sort of erotic, and sometimes they're representations of people who have passed away, and sometimes they're signs of wealth, that they can put up the wall and say, see how wealthy I am. I mean, anyway, so our relationship to these different things. But when I'm starting that next book, I find myself leaning into a lot of the older stuff that I've worked on and developed.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
exciting. Well, congratulations again on the new book.
Thank you.
And thank you, Karen, for being for sharing your wisdom with us, which we will share with the world.
Thank you so much. This is a pleasure. As always, it's nice to see you.